Thanks to everybody for having me today, in particular Ben and Mark. And I just got to say hello to Ben and Catherine backstage, but I know apparently Mark has the flu right now. So Mark, wherever you are, I think I had the same flu like a few weeks ago. It sucks, but I'm sure you'll get through it. And it's great to be with you all, and it's great to talk about the importance of American dynamism and what our administration is going to do to support so many of the country's most groundbreaking and compelling companies. I know that you guys are working hard every single day, and I think it's pretty good news, right, that as of a couple of months ago, you have an administration that's working with you and facilitating your hard work instead of making it harder to innovate, which is, I think, what the last administration did. Though, in defense of Joe Biden, he was asleep most of the time. I don't think he totally realized what he was doing, but certainly didn't make it easier. His administration did not for our innovators. Now, as some of you may have seen, and I talked about this with Ben backstage, I spoke at a conference in Paris last month where my message to a group of CEOs and foreign leaders was that we should embrace the future head on. We shouldn't be afraid of artificial intelligence, and that particularly for those of us lucky enough to be Americans, we shouldn't be fearful of productive new technologies. In fact, we should seek to dominate them, and that's certainly what this administration wants to accomplish. I suspect that most of you in this room are of like mind, and if you're not, I don't know why the hell you're at the American Dynamism conference, but I received some pushback from people who are worried about the disruptive effects of AI. One journalist suggested the speech highlighted the tension between the, quote, techno-optimists and the populist right of President Trump's coalition. And today, I'd like to speak to these tensions as a proud member of both tribes. And let me put it simply. While this is a well-intentioned concern, I think it's based on a faulty premise. This idea that tech-forward people and the populists are somehow inevitably going to come to a loggerheads is wrong. I think the reality is that in any dynamic society, technology is going to advance, of course. And speaking as a Catholic, I think back to Pope John Paul II's opening lines of the encyclical Labor Amixarens, quote, "Through work, man must earn his daily bread and contribute to the continual advance of science and technology, and above all, to elevating unceasingly the cultural and moral level of the society within which he lives," end quote. Now, I quote the Holy Father not only because I'm a fan of his, but also because he rightly understood that in a healthy economy, technology should be something that enhances rather than supplants the value of labor. And I think there's too much fear that AI will simply replace jobs rather than augmenting so many of the things that we do. Now, in the 1970s, if you go back a little ways, many feared that the automated teller machine, what we call the ATM, would replace bank tellers. In reality, the advent of the ATM made bank tellers more productive, and you have more people today working in customer service in the financial sector than you had when the ATM was created. Now they're doing slightly different jobs, of course. Yes, they're doing more interesting tasks also, and importantly, they're making more money than they were in the 1970s. Now, when we innovate, we do sometimes cause labor market disruptions. That happens. But the history of American innovation is that we tend to make people more productive, and then we increase their wages in the process. And I think all of us believe that's a good thing. Now, after all, who would claim that man was made less productive by the invention of the transistor, or the metal lathe, or the steam engine? Real innovation makes us more productive, but it also, I think, dignifies our workers. It boosts our standard of living. It strengthens our workforce and the relative value of its labor. And as Americans, all of us should be particularly proud of our extraordinary heritage. I think it is American heritage of inventing things, and of our nation's status to this day as the world's foremost driver of research and development. But all of this, the role that technology plays in a labor market, and whether we greet innovative breakthroughs with excitement or with trepidation, depends on the purpose of our economic system in the first place. And I think this is where the populists have an important point. It should be no surprise that when we send so much of our industrial base to other countries, we stop making interesting new things right here at home. Look, for example, at shipbuilding. Now, if you go back to World War II, America constructed thousands of so-called Liberty ships to carry troops, cargo, and other things, building them at a pace of 3 ships every 2 days. 3 ships every 2 days. Now, we build about 5 commercial ships across an entire year in the United States of America. And as a result, the United States today accounts for 0.1%, 0.1% of global shipbuilding. China, on the other hand, now makes more commercial ships than the rest of the world combined. In fact, one of Beijing's state-owned firms built more commercial ships just last year than all of America has produced since the end of World War II. So, while we remain the leader in technology and innovation, I think there are troubling signs on the horizon. And I raise all this to ask, does this sound like a regime, I'm speaking of China, that will pass up on the opportunity to use AI or any other technology to advance their own interests and further undermine the interests of their rivals? I think the answer is obvious, and that's why America, we've got to be tech forward. Yes, there are concerns, yes, there are risks, but we have to be leaning into the AI future with optimism and hope, because I think real technological innovation is going to make our country stronger. So deindustrialization poses risks both to our national security and our workforce. It's important because it affects both. And the net result is dispossession for many in this country of any part of the productive process. And when our factories disappear and the jobs in those factories go overseas, American workers are faced not only with financial insecurity, they're also faced with a profound loss of personal and communal identity. And so to come full circle on this tension, alleged tension between the populace and the techno-optimists, I can understand a reaction of skepticism when we talk about the revolutionary potential of new invention and artificial intelligence and all the other incredible technologies that you guys are working. But I think that that tension is a little overstated. And so I'm going to come back to what's sort of dividing some of the tech optimists and the populists on our side. I think the populists, when they look at the future, and when they compare it to what's happened in the past, I think a lot of them see alienation of workers from their jobs, from their communities, from their sense of solidarity. You see the alienation of people from their sense of purpose. And importantly, they see a leadership class that believes welfare can replace a job and an application on a phone can replace a sense of purpose. Now, I remember a Silicon Valley dinner in particular back when I was in my tech days, where my wife and I were sitting around talking to some of the leaders of the important technology firms of the United States, and this was probably in 2016 or 2017. And I was talking about my real worry that we were heading in a direction where America could no longer support middle-class families working on middle-class wages. And importantly, that even if you had enough economic dynamism to provide the wealth to ensure those people could, afford to buy a house and afford their food and so forth, that even if you replaced the financial element of their jobs, you would destroy something that was dignified and purposeful about work itself. And I remember one of the tech CEOs who was there, CEO, you would know his name if I mentioned it. He was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. He said, well, I'm actually not worried about the loss of purpose when people lose their jobs. And I said, okay, well, what do you think is going to replace that sense of purpose? And he said, digital, fully immersive gaming. And then my wife texted me underneath the table and said, we have to get the hell out of here. These people are effing crazy. Now, I don't think that, of course, that CEO's views are representative of most people in this room, but when I think about a lot of the workers, based on what they've seen in the past, are very worried about the future because, frankly, their leadership has failed to serve them. And then I think about this from the perspective of a lot of the tech optimists. I think a lot of the tech optimists, they see overregulation, they see stifling innovation. I mean, you guys are builders. They are builders. And while they may sympathize with those who lost a job, they're much more frustrated that the government won't allow them to build the jobs of the future. And they know that as hard as it is to build a business in digital media, it's still harder to build one in robotics or life sciences or energy in what we call the world of atoms. They see a government that makes their lives harder, and they must trust anyone who looks to that government for aid. And what I propose is that each group, our workers, the populists on the one hand, the tech optimists on the other, have been failed by this government, not just the government of the last administration, but the government in some ways of the last 40 years. Because there were two conceits that our leadership class had when it came to globalization. The first is assuming that we can separate the making of things from the design of things. The idea of globalization was that rich countries would move further up the value chain while the poor countries made the simpler things. You would open an iPhone box and it would say designed in Cupertino, California. Now the implication, of course, is that it would be manufactured in Shenzhen or somewhere else. And yeah, some people might lose their jobs in manufacturing, but they could learn to design, or to use a very popular phrase, learn to code. But I think we got it wrong. It turns out that the geographies that do the manufacturing get awfully good at the designing of things. There are network effects, as you all well understand. The firms that design products work with firms that manufacture. They share intellectual property, they share best practices, and they even sometimes share critical employees. Now, we assume that other nations would always trail us in the value chain, but it turns out that as they got better at the low end of the value chain, they also started catching up on the higher end. We were squeezed from both ends. Now, that was the first conceit of globalization. I think the second is that cheap labor is fundamentally a crutch, and it's a crutch that inhibits innovation. I might even say that it's a drug that too many American firms got addicted to. Now, if you can make a product more cheaply, it's far too easy to do that rather than to innovate. And whether we were offshoring factories to cheap labor economies or importing cheap labor through our immigration system, cheap labor became the drug of Western economies. And I'd say that if you look in nearly every country from Canada to the UK that imported large amounts of cheap labor, you've seen productivity stagnate. I don't think that's not a total happenstance. I think that the connection is very direct. Now, one of the debates you hear on the minimum wage, for instance, is that increases in the minimum wage force firms to automate. So a higher wage at McDonald's means more kiosks. And whatever your views on the wisdom of the minimum wage, I'm not going to comment on that here. Companies innovating in the absence of cheap labor is a good thing. I think most of you are not worried about getting cheaper and cheaper labor. You're worried about innovating, about building new things, about the old formulation of technology is doing more with less. You guys are all trying to do more with less every single day. And so I'd ask my friends, both on the tech optimist side and on the populist side, not to see the failure of the logic of globalization as a failure of innovation. Indeed, I'd say that globalization's hunger for cheap labor is a problem precisely because it's been bad for innovation. Both our working people, our populists, and our innovators gathered here today have the same enemy. And the solution, I believe, is American innovation. Because in the long run, it's technology that increases the value of labor. Innovations like the American system and the interchangeable parts revolution it sparked, or Ford's moving assembly line that skyrocketed the productivity of our workers. That's how American industry became the envy of the world. And that's what I really want to talk about today, why innovation is key to winning the worldwide manufacturing competition, to giving our workers a fair deal, and to reclaiming our heritage via America's great industrial comeback. And I believe that's what we're on the cusp of, a great American industrial comeback. Because innovation is what increases wages. It's what protects our homelands, and I know we have a lot of defense technology companies here. It's what saves troops' lives on the battlefield. And I know everyone here today largely agrees. It's why we have some of the greatest inventors and thinkers in energy, precision machining, countless critical high-value industries just in this room. And I think the other thing that unites all of you is that you're builders. And I use that word deliberately. I was very moved by Mark's manifesto from a few years ago about America. We are a nation of builders. We make things. We create things. Each of you came to this summit not because you developed some flash-in-the-pan application, but because you're building something very real. You're raising new factories, you're turning profits back into R&D, and you're creating new, good-paying jobs for your fellow Americans. And this is why I'm such huge fans of yours, of Ben's and Mark's, and of the entire endeavor. And that we recognize now in our administration is the time to align our work interests with those of all of you. It's time to align the interests of our technology firms with the interests of the United States of America writ large. Now, all of you, in your own ways, have answered that call. After all, there's nothing forcing anyone to be in the room today. Each one of you could have set up headquarters in Southeast Asia or China, I'm sure, and you would have done quite well for yourselves financially. But you're here, I hope, because you love your country. You love its people and the opportunities that it's given you, and you recognize that building things, our capacity to create new innovation in the economy, cannot be a race to the bottom. Now, America's not going to win the future by ditching child labor laws or paying our workers less than Chinese or Vietnamese laborers. We don't want that, and it's not on the table. We can only win by doing what we always did, protecting our workers and supporting our innovators, and doing both of those things at the same time. And so, I want to talk a little specifics here. The Trump administration's great plan for staging the great American manufacturing comeback is simple. You're making interesting new things here in America? Great. Then we're going to cut your taxes, we're going to slash regulations, we're going to reduce the cost of energy so that you can build. Our goal is to incentivize investment in our own borders, in our own businesses, our own workers, and our own innovation. We don't want people seeking cheap labor. We want them investing and building right here in the United States of America. And so if you'll allow it, I'd like to talk about a few ways that the Trump administration is already pursuing a pro-innovation economy that allows our workers to thrive and our companies to outcompete their foreign peers. In short, an economy that is vibrantly America first, that serves Americans from all walks of life and of every kind. Now, first, President Trump is starting with, and is dead serious, about rearranging our trade and tariff regime internationally. We believe that tariffs are a necessary tool to protect our jobs and our industries from other countries, as well as the labor value of our workers in a globalized market. In fact, combined with the right technology, they allow us to bring jobs back to the United States of America and create the jobs of the future. Just look in the past few months at the auto industry as an important example. When you erect a tariff wall around a critical industry like auto manufacturing, and you combine that with advanced robotics and lower energy costs and other tools that increase the productivity of U.S. labor, you give American workers a multiplying effect. Now that, in turn, allows firms to make things here at a price-competitive basis. Our president gets that, which is why last month we posted 9,000 new auto jobs after many, many years of stagnation or even decline in the auto sector. It's why, just weeks in, we already have new plant or production announcements from Honda, from Hyundai, and Stellantis worth billions of dollars and thousands of additional jobs on top of the ones that were already created. Now, this takes work. It took, in the president's first term, the president ripping up NAFTA and creating a new U.S. deal for American manufacturers in North America. But there's important work, and we're going to do it. Now, second, all of this is why the president is approaching the issue of illegal immigration as aggressively as he has, because he knows that cheap labor cannot be used as a substitute for the productivity gains that come with economic innovation. And so we've cracked down on illegal immigration at the border, where the results speak for themselves. Last month, migrant crossings were down 94% to their lowest number all time, and that happened just in 2 months of serious border enforcement. Thanks to President Trump's leadership, last month, for the first time in over a year, the majority of job gains went to American citizens born on U.S. soil, and that's important. For the first time in over a year, the majority of job creation actually went to American citizens. The third, this administration is focused on reducing our input costs for our manufacturers and for everybody else. Achieving energy abundance, and I know Doug Burgum was here earlier, will be here later, is top of mind. Because when we look at some of the most exciting applications of new technologies, we realize it's going to take a lot of power to keep them running. And we're thrilled to have our friends from the United Arab Emirates, a number of the business leaders and government leaders in town this week for meetings with our government. And one of the things they consistently hammer upon is something that unfortunately too few of our European allies tend to get, is that if you want to lead in artificial intelligence, you have got to be leading in energy production. So we are going to set the pace there, and we are going to lead from the front. Now, we are already seeing, the good news is, signs of progress, even just a couple of months in. Gas and diesel prices are dropping, the cost of a barrel of U.S. crude is way down, and last Wednesday, the administration took major steps to make energy even cheaper and liberate our companies from stifling environmental regulations. Now, that is great, but of course, there's a lot more work we have to do over the next 4 years. Getting the tax bill right is especially critical for all of you and for all of your workers. We know how important it is to restore 100% bonus depreciation for capital investments, as well as full expensing for R&D. Again, we want people to invest in America, and we're going to make sure the tax code reflects that. In order to build on the success of the original tax law, meaning the tax law from the president's first administration, our administration is working to broaden some provisions that are critical to the industrial base, like expanding full expensing to cover factory construction. For business owners, including manufacturers, making the 2017 tax cuts permanent will provide further confidence and predictability to invest in new technology and equipment, hire more American workers, and grow all of your businesses. And we have a lot more to do, but the country's already starting to see the payoff of this administration's bold economic agenda. For producers and consumers alike, inflation is finally starting to come down. Core CPI last week dropped to its lowest number since April of 2021. And when it comes to the labor market, last month's jobs report showed a massive reversal. 10,000 new manufacturing jobs created, where the previous year we had lost over 100,000 manufacturing jobs. As you may have heard the president say, in less than 2 months since he took office, he's already secured more than $1.7 trillion in new investments across the United States. That's hundreds of thousands of new jobs in manufacturing, AI, other hard tech sectors, and more. So we think there's a lot to be excited about. There's a lot that we're excited about, and we certainly hope that you guys are excited too. But the fundamental premise, the fundamental goal of President Trump's economic policy is, I think, to undo 40 years of failed economic policy in this country. For far too long, we got addicted to cheap labor, both overseas and by importing it into our own country, and we got lazy. We overregulated our industries instead of supporting them. We overtaxed our innovators instead of making it easier for them to build their great companies. And we made it way too hard to build things and invest things in the United States of America. That stopped 2 months ago, and it will continue to stop, and will continue to fight for American workers and the American businesses that hire them and that support them. So I want to thank you all for two things. Number one, I want to thank you all for doing what you do. Again, you could have chosen the easy path. Every single person in this room, as the president would say, you're all very high IQ. You're some of the most talented people in the United States of America. You chose to build a business right here in the United States of America, and for that I'm grateful. But the second thing I want to say is that I think you're not just building your own business, I think that you are part of a great American industrial renaissance. Whether it's the war of the future, the jobs of the future, the economic prosperity of the future, we believe that we must build it right here in the United States of America. So thank you all for building in America, and thank you all for building the kind of society that I want to raise my children in. God bless you all. Thanks for having me.
Today I'm doing another 2028 presidential election prediction, and this one I am doing what should be a very, very fun and contested one. The Republican Vice President of the United States, JD Vance, and the Governor of the state of California, Gavin Newsom. This one I'm really interested by because I feel like this one would actually have a very good idea of policy. I think Newsom and Vance would both be very direct and straightforward with what policies they support, and I think it'd be a real decision for the country to make. Do they want to go more big government or small government? And Newsom versus Vance would be very, very good. And I need to address, before getting to the prediction, obviously the situation with the California wildfires. I know I've seen a bunch of comments saying that, is Gavin Newsom done because of this? He has no political future. I would say, honestly, on that front, for now, I would say hold on. because the situation in California is bad, but also let's not forget 2028 is 4 years, or going to be 3 to 4 years away. And Americans, I think when it comes to politics, a lot of Americans forget things very, very quickly. And I'm not even sure 100% that this will affect Newsom's chances in 2028 at all in a Democratic primary in 2028. So even if things seem bleak for Newsom now, which again, there's debate as to whether or not it does, I think by 2028, a lot of the things being discussed now probably won't be as big of a deal come 2028. So I just wanted to say that before getting into the video. First things first, I start off with 108 electoral votes as toss-up across all the states in gray, 211 electoral votes for Gavin Newsom, JD Vance with 219. This is where I think the electoral map starts off. I'm going to start with the state of Nevada and its 6 electoral votes. Nevada, we saw in 2024 vote for Donald Trump with 51% to Kamala Harris's 47%. That is a lean Republican win. As for Vance versus Newsom, it's interesting because I'm very skeptical that Vance will be able to do as well as Donald Trump did in terms of getting out people to vote. But I think for Vance versus Newsom, if Trump does a bunch of events and rallies in support of Vance, which I expect he will, I think he would be able to do enough where he'd be able to win the state of Nevada in a lean margin. I don't think Vance is going to do better than Trump did in 2024, honestly, probably anywhere. But I do think at very least he may be able to stay within like half a percentage point or so, or within 1% of what Trump was able to get in the state of Nevada. That puts Vance at 225, Newsom at 211. The state of Arizona and its 11 electoral votes voted for Donald Trump over Kamala Harris, 52% to 47%. That is a 5% win. That would be considered likely Republican. Vance is interesting because I think Vance, again, does not have as much baggage as Trump does in the state of Arizona with the John McCain family and such. So I think Vance actually against Newsom, despite obviously California and Arizona being right nearby, Vance may have potential to do better in Arizona, but I think Vance, at the end of the day, will win it by just a hair under 5%, like 4.5% in Arizona. And that's going to be one that I think it's going to really come down to the wire. This puts Vance at 236. Newsom is still at 211. Nebraska's 2nd district, we did just see it vote for Kamala Harris by about 5%. This, again, right on the edge between lean and likely. And I think with Gavin Newsom, I think it would narrowly go in the lean column, just under 5 points for Gavin Newsom. The state of Minnesota and its 10 electoral votes, we did just see it vote for Kamala Harris over Donald Trump, 51% to 47%. And I think in this election as well, Minnesota, it's either going to be a likely Democratic state or a lean Democratic state. I'm going to narrowly put it as lean Democrat, but again, another one I think it's really, really close. Maybe it would be a little bit over lean and just into likely by a little bit, like a little over 5%. Because I think Donald Trump did very well in getting a lot of Republicans out to vote in Minnesota, and I'm not sure JD Vance will be able to do that as well. Like maybe just a bit into likely, but I think I'm going to keep it with lean Democrat for now. Now we move into the state of Georgia and its 16 electoral votes. This should be a very interesting one. This is a very close race in 2024. Donald Trump was able to win with 51% to Kamala Harris's 49%. And this one will be the closest that I've had so far in all my predictions for the state of Georgia. I am giving it to JD Vance, but I'm giving it to him under 1% of the vote. I do think we're going to see a continuing trend in Georgia where the red rural areas will continue to vote red as they always have and did for Donald Trump. But due to Fulton County and the surrounding Democratic suburbs of Atlanta voting very heavily for Kamala Harris, I think we see that continue in 2028, and Georgia ends up going for Vance by under 1%. As for the state of North Carolina, we did just see vote for Donald Trump, 51% to 48% versus Kamala Harris. And I honestly think this is a state that's always talked about potentially flipping in 2028. And I personally just don't see it. I think Vance wins it, and I think he wins it by a lean Republican margin, which means over 1%. If I was not clear on that, by the way, lean Republican is in between 1 and 5. Tilt is 1 or under. Likely is 5 to 15. And the dark red, dark blue, safe is 15 or more. And I think Vance will win North Carolina by about 2 to 2.5%. Again, about 0.5% off what Donald Trump did, but still enough to keep it in the Republican column. For the state of New Hampshire and its 4 electoral votes, It's a state that came actually pretty close in 2024. Kamala Harris won at 51%, Donald Trump got 48%. This is one where I think Vance actually may make more of a play for it than Trump did in 2024, but I think Newsom will still be able to hold on and win the state, not by more than 5%, but probably win it by like 4 to 4.5%, keeping it as 4 electoral votes in the Democratic Hall. Now we come to the 3 Rust Belt states. This is Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And so far, with Vance versus Newsom, the trend I've been seeing, at least in my own prediction for this, is I feel like Vance is going to do about a half point behind what Trump has been doing. So with that half point, I think it's possible that for the state of Wisconsin, which did vote by 0.9% for Trump over Harris, I do think, though, there may be a little bit more than 0.5% difference in Wisconsin, where Trump did very good at getting a lot of voters to turn out for him in the state of Wisconsin. I'm skeptical if Vance can do as good of a job. Maybe he can, but I'm a little skeptical that he'll be able to. I think all the 3 Rust Belt states, I think we could potentially see Wisconsin actually narrowly go by under 1% for Gavin Newsom. And that would put him at 236 electoral votes. I predicted accurately that all 3 Rust Belt states would vote for Donald Trump in the 2024 presidential election. As for 2028, it's so far away, we're not going to know until things get closer. But I wouldn't be shocked if the streak of the 3 states voting in unison did break, especially if JD Vance does win the election. It is possible he wins them in a bit of a split. As for the state of Pennsylvania, we're going to come back to Michigan. Pennsylvania voted for Donald Trump 50.4% to 48.7%. This is one where I think the election's really going to be close, and I think it is going to be decided in 2028 once again. And I think Vance will win the state of Pennsylvania, but he will win it by under 1%. Again, I don't think Vance will do as well as Donald Trump did at getting a lot of people who typically don't vote that did turn out to vote for Donald Trump. I think Vance may lose some of those voters, so much so that the states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania will all be decided by 1% or less for whichever candidate wins it. I do think Pennsylvania does stay a little bit more Republican and does vote for Vance in 2028, especially versus Gavin Newsom, but I do think it's going to be very, very close. And for the state of Michigan, it's 15 electoral votes. We saw a pretty big swing here for Donald Trump, going up to 49.7%, Harris 48.3%. This is the biggest a Republican has gotten percentage-wise. In the 2000s, even with Trump winning it in 2016, this was a much bigger percentage for Donald Trump. And I do think Michigan is going to narrowly stay Republican for JD Vance, but not only do I think it's under 1% of the vote, I think it's even under 0.5% of the vote, something around 0.4, 0.3 in the state of Michigan for Vance over Newsom. Because I think Vance versus Newsom is going to be, probably a lot more lower turnout than Trump versus Harris or Trump versus Biden was, but I do think it's going to be very, very close, and the battleground states are going to have 3 or 4 states all deciding the race by under 1% in a matchup like this. I think 2028 will be very close. Typically, the last time I can think of a VP running immediately after the president was when George H.W. Bush ran after Ronald Reagan in 1988. In that election, H.W. Bush did not do as well as Reagan did, obviously, in the last election before that. I think the streak continues with Vance, the sitting VP doing worse, a little bit worse than the president did in his last election. So I think Vance will still win against Gavin Newsom, but I think it'll be by a hair. It'll be by a very close election where a few tens of thousands of votes across about 5 or 6 toss-up states really decide the election. So for Vance versus Newsom, I have Vance getting 302 electoral votes, Newsom getting 236. I'm interested to hear what you have to think of this video. Who do you think will win between JD Vance and Gavin Newsom if this is the 2028 presidential election? Make sure to give the video a like, leave a comment below telling me your thoughts. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and keep coming back because I post a new video every single day, so make sure you come back for those. That'll do it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in a future video. That will do it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to give it a like. And if you really liked it, please remember to click the subscribe button and make sure you turn post notifications on so you always get notified when I post a new video. That way you never miss one. Also, please remember to share this video
President Trump and House Republicans, as soon as he says jump, your only answer is how high. It doesn't matter whether you are hurting the American people. That's why House Republicans are marching the country on a track toward the largest Medicaid cut in American history. You hurt children, hurt families, hurt Americans with disabilities, hurt seniors, close nursing homes and close hospitals. When Donald Trump says jump, extreme MAGA Republicans say how high. That's the fatal attraction. That's hurting the people of the United States of America. And by the way, the core promise that you made last year was about lowering costs. All you talked about was how you were going to lower the high cost of living. Democrats believe that America is too expensive. Housing costs are too high. Grocery costs are too high. Child care costs are too high. Utility costs are too high. And insurance costs are too high. America is too expensive. We believe that that, in fact, is the case. But Republicans have done nothing to lower the high cost of living. No bill, no executive order, no administrative action. That's the broken promise. We were told by President Trump that costs were going to go down on day one. Grocery prices haven't gone down, they've gone up. Inflation is up. You know what's going down? The stock market. Because President Trump and House Republicans are crashing the economy in real time and marching us to a possible Republican recession. That's what's confronting the American people. And so now we have this partisan, reckless spending bill that we're being asked to consider on the floor today. Bipartisan negotiations were underway. Rosa DeLauro was at the table, working to reach an agreement consistent with the Fiscal Responsibility Act that was passed by Republicans and Democrats and then signed into law in 2023. But when Donald Trump says jump, extreme MAGA Republicans say how high. And he ordered the Republicans to leave the negotiating table to try to jam this far-right extremist bill down the throats of the American people. There are so many challenges with this bill, too many to detail. But let me just articulate a few. The House Republican, highly partisan, shutdown threatening bill is an attack on veterans, it's an attack on families, it's an attack on seniors. It cuts funding for veterans, including billions of dollars in funds that will be cut from veterans in desperate need of health care for people who serve this country, who are suffering from painful exposure to toxic substances, Agent Orange and burn pits. And this bill, before this House, cuts billions of dollars in that health care that is desperately needed. That's an attack on veterans. It's an attack on children and families in America because this bill cuts funding for nutritional assistance that would otherwise be available for everyday Americans to put food on the table. When people are already struggling because grocery prices aren't going down, they're going up under this administration. And yet, this Republican bill will cut funding for nutritional assistance. That's an attack on children and families here in America. It's an attack on seniors, an attack on everyday Americans, an attack on housing, an attack on health care. which cuts funds from things like Alzheimer's research to help older Americans battle these challenges. That's what this extreme Republican bill is all about. It will hurt families, hurt seniors, and hurt veterans. The second problem, equally troublesome, is that this bill does nothing to protect Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. We've been very clear. As Democrats, we look forward in this Congress to protecting these vitally important priorities for the American people. Why is the bill silent on these priorities? Because you are trying to set in motion a chainsaw to Social Security, a chainsaw to Medicare, and a chainsaw to Medicaid. Your other boss yesterday confirmed that when he said that these entitlement programs, as he called them, they're not entitlement programs, they are earned benefits. When you start to use the language of entitlement programs, it's because you're trying to set in motion an assault on Social Security and an assault on Medicare. It's saying the quiet part out loud. We know you're going after Social Security and Medicare because you've been firing thousands of people from the Social Security Administration. You want to collapse the system. And this bill does nothing to stop that. All it does is facilitate the collapsing of Social Security by dismantling the Social Security Administration. And of course, we know what's going on with your assault on Medicaid, $880 billion. Assaulting the health care of the American people. We've been very clear. We'll work together to protect Social Security, protect Medicare, protect Medicaid. You have no interest in doing that because you want to take a chainsaw to these priorities. And by the way, it has nothing to do with waste, fraud, and abuse. As Democrats, we've been very clear. We want to build a federal government, make sure that we have a federal government that's effective, that's efficient, and that's equitable, delivering services all across the country in a manner that spends taxpayer dollars wisely. But that's not what this effort is all about. This bill will unleash fury on the American people. It will facilitate the ongoing effort that is currently underway. The average Social Security recipient in this country receives $65 a day. They have to survive on $65 a day. But you want to take a chainsaw to Social Security. When Elon Musk and his tens of billions of dollars of government contracts essentially makes at least $8 million a day from the taxpayers. If you want to uncover waste, fraud, or abuse, start there. Don't start with the $65 a day that Social Security recipients receive from their earned benefits, from their hard work throughout their entire lives. Start there. Elon Musk is $8 billion a day feeding at the trough of the American taxpayer. This has nothing to do, this bill right here, with waste, fraud, and abuse. It's all part of a broader scheme to pass massive tax cuts for billionaire donors, the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected, and then to stick working-class Americans with the bill. This entire scheme. And as Democrats, we want no part of it because we're fighting hard to make life better for everyday Americans, to make sure that when you work hard and play by the rules in the United States of America, you should be able to provide a comfortable living for yourself and for your family. Educate your children, purchase a home, have access to health care. Go on vacation every now and then. One day retire with grace and with dignity. That's the American dream. As House Democrats, we're fighting to preserve. This Republican shutdown bill does nothing to enhance the American dream. It undermines it. Which is why we are strongly opposed to this effort, part of a power grab from those who are unelected, unaccountable, unhinged, and then working at the direction of this administration, which again has done nothing to improve the economy, nothing to lower costs, nothing to make life better for everyday Americans. And this reckless Republican bill will make things worse. I was in Selma over the weekend. We had an opportunity to once again cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Think about the fact that John Lewis and Amelia Boykin Robinson and Hosea Williams and so many others, as they stood on that bridge, knew that there was trouble on the other side. But even though there was trouble on the other side, they believed that their cause was righteous, and it was. It was a just one. It was designed to make America the best version of herself. And we stand here today, standing on their shoulders, continuing that effort. How do we make sure that the American dream is alive and well for everyone, in every corner of America, throughout every community? And that's what House Democrats will continue to fight for. That's why we oppose this bill, this effort to hurt families and veterans and seniors and children and everyday Americans. And so we're going to continue to show up. We're going to continue to stand up. We're going to continue to speak up for what is right. We oppose this bill. We oppose this partisan effort to hurt the American people. And we will continue to stand on the side of bringing the American dream to life for every single American.
Lawmakers face a deadline of tomorrow to avert a government shutdown. Let's bring in House Minority Leader, Democratic Congressman Hakeem Jeffries of New York. It's great to have you on the show. Let's first talk about the threat of a government shutdown. Are Democrats looking at least worst options here? What do you make of it?
Well, good morning. Great to be with you. This is all about the American people. House Republicans and Donald Trump have passed a partisan spending bill that will hurt everyday Americans. That's the problem. The bill that passed the House in a partisan way and was sent over to the Senate will hurt veterans, hurt families, hurt children, and hurt seniors. It cuts health care. It cuts nutritional assistance for children, and it cuts veterans' benefits, including as it relates to individuals who are suffering from exposure to toxic substances, burn pits, and Agent Orange. That's completely unacceptable, and so we're standing on the side of the American people.
Leader Jeffries, good morning. I want to get your reaction to something that some of your Democratic Senate colleagues are saying, that there's fears here that if the government were to shut down, that it would actually empower President Trump to decide who is essential or not. Basically, he could sort of keep the government or help influence keeping the government shut down, allowing he and Elon Musk to continue to make sort of cuts. Is that a fear you share?
The best path forward, as has been articulated by Leader Schumer Democrats in the Senate and Democrats in the House, is to move a 4-week spending bill that would freeze spending and allow for negotiations to continue in a bipartisan way so we can reach an agreement that actually meets the needs of the American people in terms of their health, their safety, their economic well-being, and America's national security. That's the best path forward. That's the responsible way forward. And it's unfortunate that House Republicans irresponsibly are trying to jam a far-right extreme bill down the throats of the American people, and then they got out of town. We should all be in Washington prepared to vote on a bipartisan agreement that allows negotiations to continue.
Leader Jeffries, it's Ali Vitale. I wonder, though, Senator Blumenthal was just on with us talking about how, while Republicans don't have the votes for their continuing resolution, Democrats also in the Senate right now don't have the votes for the continuing resolution that they want to pass. So where does that lead next? It feels like if both sides hold their ground, a shutdown is basically inevitable at that point.
It's not clear to me that the votes don't exist for what essentially is a 4-week extension of the existing funding agreement that would meet the needs of the American people and prevent a shutdown. But, you know, this is a situation here in America where President Donald Trump and Republicans are actually crashing the economy in real time. They are driving us toward a recession. They have broken all of their promises as it relates to driving down the high cost of living. They are hurting everyday Americans. Costs aren't going down, they're going up. The stock market is going down. Consumer confidence is going down. Consumer spending is going down. The retirement security of the American people is going down. And so this economic catastrophe that Republicans are bringing about will just continue under a Trump shutdown.
Now is House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries. Welcome, sir.
Good morning, sir. Leader Jeffries, we had Congressman Clyburn on earlier in the show, and he described you as being blindsided by Senate leadership. Help us understand what happened.
Well, House Democrats were strongly opposed.
Spike in anti-Semitism we're experiencing right now in America began after the worst instance of violence committed against Jewish people since the Holocaust.
Back in 2023, New York Senator Chuck Schumer made a passionate and personal speech from the Senate floor condemning anti-Semitism, and that is the topic of his new book called Anti-Semitism in America, A Warning. In it, he writes, the rise of anti-Semitism is a, quote, 5-alarm fire that threatens American democracy. And Senator Schumer joins us now. Senator, thank you very much for being here.
Great to be with you all.
Wouldn't want to be looking out your window when I woke up this morning, right? You've got protesters out there. It's been a difficult few days. We're going to get to that. We're also going to get to the book. But I want to talk about what's going on in the Middle East, because overnight, the ceasefire that had held and that you had celebrated between Israel and Hamas has been broken.
Right.
Your reaction to that, and do you think a ceasefire could get back on the table?
Yes.
Could it be reestablished?
They were First, it says Hamas, which I believe has been a large cause of the trouble, would disarm and Israel would remove its soldiers from Gaza. So they were close. It fell apart. I don't know the exact details. It happened overnight. But I think our government has to work really hard to bring them back to the table and get those hostages home. And I think it's possible because they were close at one point.
Now, last week, you and 9 other Democrats helped avert a government shutdown by voting for a Republican-written bill, which many Democrats have been angered by, and we've seen it described as a civil war, as a train wreck. Many Democrats believe, you know, if you have a government shutdown that will force President Trump and Republicans to the negotiating table, why not use your vote to push back and fight?
Because the idea that they would go to the negotiating table is they don't do it. This is a new group. This is not the old group. Let me explain. I knew when I took this vote there'd be a lot of protest, but I felt I had to do it for the future, not only of the Democratic Party, but the country. Because here's as bad as that CR bill was, and it was bad, a shutdown is 10 times worse. Let me give you
And
what
would have
happens.
been blamed on the Democrats.
And you're right, Gail.
But you
can
had
I
been
just
saying-
explain
But
what?
you had been saying you were not going to vote. That you, I think people were upset with you, and people are very upset with you because you had led people to believe that no, I'm going to vote against.
Okay,
it.
well, let me explain
Yeah.
why first the shutdown is terrible. People ought to know that. The executive branch, in this case, Musk, Doge, and this horrible guy Vogt, who have no concern for working people, would have had sole power to determine what opens and what closes. They determine what is essential. You can't go to court. So on day 2, get rid of SNAP and food for hungry kids. It's not essential. Day 4, get rid of mass transit aid. Let New York City do it. Not essential. Cut back on Medicaid and health care. Within 2 weeks, everyone would have been howling. Furthermore, it's even worse. It has no off-ramp. Guess who determines when we leave the shutdown? The Republicans. And let's not forget how bad they are. This guy Vogt, probably the most evil man. He's the guy who came up with that Project 2025.
Yes.
Yeah, he has a whole playbook of what to shut down. So they had said, one of the Republican senators who knows said to us, you'll be in the shutdown for 6 to 9 months till we totally destroy the federal government. So the shutdown was a much worse alternative. I knew I'd get a lot of flack.
But Senator,
I took
should
some
you-
bullets
you did,
from other people.
and you're still taking bullets. But should you have let people know you're thinking ahead of time? Because really, people thought.
The problem was it came so fast. Hakeem and I had a strategy, which was to try and get a bipartisan bill,
Yes.
which meant in the House, the Republicans would have not been able to pass it. Only at the last minute did it happen that they all voted for it. And so Patty Murray tried to get that bipartisan bill on Wednesday. That's why I said we didn't have the votes yet. They pulled out Wednesday night, and Thursday we had 2 bad choices. But I assure the public, a shutdown would have been the greatest disaster we have to put the government in the sole hands of the evil, nasty, nihilistic people like Musk and Vogt and Trump. Would have been
Senator.
the greatest. We would have had half the federal government we have now. So I thought I did the thing a leader should do.
Senator.
Even when people don't see the danger around the curve,
Yeah.
my job was to alert people to it, and I knew I'd get some bullets.
Senator, the leader in question, that is actually what people are debating right now. There are people in your party who don't want you to be a leader in the party anymore. And it's a question of what is this moment and what does it require? I want to ask a question about that moment involving the Venezuelan deportations and the court hearings around it. Put the charges or lack of evidence or whatever against these men aside for now, and let's just talk about the interaction of the Trump administration and the court.
Yes.
They seem to take the position that this court doesn't have jurisdiction over them, and you have Tom Homan saying he doesn't care what the judge thinks. What did Democrats do if and when the Trump administration defies a federal judge?
First of all, we have to have rule of law. People say, well, that's not me. If we get rid of rule of law, 248-year tradition in America, this democracy is over, okay? So it's vital to stop it. There are 2 courts.
How do the Democrats do that?
There are 2 courts. One is the court of public opinion. And the public has to if this happens, they have to make their voices known, Democrats, Republicans, everyone, in the strongest terms, because it's ending our democracy. Now, but we also have the courts. And so far, the lower courts have done a good job. We hope the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court will do the same job. When the lower courts, and I'm very proud that we put in all those judges last year, many of whom are making these decisions, when the lower courts thus far have said to the Trump administration, you must stop, in most cases they have.
But you hear the Trump administration saying we're not going to pay attention to the court.
If they don't, and we go to the Supreme Court and it is defied, democracy is at real risk, and there will have to be extraordinary action taken.
Tony touched on it, Senator.
And that is by the people, by everybody.
But there are people in your own party that are saying, look, it's time for you to go. They no longer trust your leadership. They want somebody else in there. What do you say about that?
Here's what I say.
In your own party saying
Yes.
you've got to go.
Here's what I'm saying. I'm the best leader for the Senate. We have a lot of leaders. You know, when you don't have a president, there's not one leader of the party. There are lots of them. We have a lot of good people. But I am the best at keep winning Senate seats. I've done it in 2005. Just in 2020, no one thought we'd take back the Senate. Under my leadership, we took it. So we now are executing.
You're not going anywhere.
We have a great. We're moving forward. Hakeem and I have a plan. Let me just say this. There's a real contrast between the parties. The Republican Party now, particularly in office, is the party of rich oligarchs who want to really screw every average American so they can get tax cuts for the rich. And we are fighting that every day. So today, we just issued a statement at 8 o'clock that describes it. Hakeem and I, we have a day of action on Medicaid. In every state, in every corner of the country, Democrats are talking about they're going to Medicaid centers. They're going to people who would be deprived and
Senator, people don't have faith in the Democrats.
Well, let me say this.
And those average Americans.
And we're going to do this day in, day out on issues. Why are they doing tariffs and raising your cost $2,000? It's beginning to work. Why are they taking away Fannie and Freddie and raising your housing costs dramatically? It's beginning to work. His numbers have come down. If we keep at it every day, relentless fighting and showing how they're hurting people so badly, Trump's numbers will get much lower. And his both popularity but also his effectiveness will decline. I believe that strategy will work.
May I hold up the book?
Yes.
Yeah, let's get to the book.
This is why you were here.
Yes.
Because news that stays news, anti-Semitism.
Yes. Yeah, it's coming out at a time where you said you never thought you'd have to write this book, but you never thought anti-Semitism would be as bad as it is. You said for many non-Jewish people, it's alarming, but it's not a real problem.